This recording was made possible through the support and cooperation of the Collectors Admiralty. The book that will be read is available at TCA Central Library and can be visited and read at Shop 1920, First Floor, Zaman Plaza, Westridge Bazaar, Rawalpindi. For more information about the book and TCA, send an email to thecollectorsadmiralty.gensec@gmail.com. The reader of this book is Shiroz Amin. It is currently the 5th of March 2021, 12:45 p.m. Destination: Almethia. The Science Fiction and Adventure Library. This book was published by the Foreign Languages Publishing House, Moscow. It was translated from the Russian by Leonid Kolesnikov, edited by Richard Dixon, and designed by Nikolai Grishin. Contents: The Astronaut by Valentina Zuravlyova. Page 7. Over the Abyss by Alexander Belayev. Page 39. The Maxwell Equations by Anatoly Dniprov. Page 67. The Valley of the Four Crosses by Igor Sabelin. Page 143. The Golubyavan by Kirill Stanyukovich. Page 229. Flying Flowers by Mikhail Vasilyev. Page 255. Destination: Almethia by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. Page 295. The Astronaut by Valentina Zuravlyova. "What can I do for these people?" shouted Danko in a voice that drowned the thunder. Suddenly he clutched at his breast, tore it open, plucked out his heart, and held it high above his head. Maxim Gorky. I think I should begin by explaining in a few words the reason that brought me to the Central Astronautics Archives. My story might otherwise seem incomplete. I am a spaceship physician with 3 astro flights to my credit. My subject is psychiatry, or rather astropsychiatry, as it is called nowadays. The problem which I am working on at present first arose years back in the 1970s. In those days, flights to Mars took over a year, to Mercury just under 2 years. The engines only worked at takeoff and touchdown. No astronomical observations were carried out in flight. Sputnik mounted observatories did that. So what could the crews do during these long months? Practically nothing. Forced inactivity led to tension, to nervous breakdowns, and mental disorders. No amount of reading or listening in could make up for what the first spacemen lacked on board ship. For what they lacked was work. The hard, creative work to which they were accustomed. It was then that the principle of hobby-minded personnel selection was first advanced. The nature of the hobby, it was thought, was entirely immaterial, so long as it gave the astronauts something to do during the flight. And thus we got pilots who had a passion for mathematics, navigators keen on ancient manuscripts, poetry writing engineers, etc. There was a new entry in the astronauts' certificates, the famous item 12, interests other than professional. However, a breakthrough in rocket technology soon provided a new solution of the problem. Ion engines cut travel between planets to a few days. Item 12 was dropped. Some years later, however, the problem reappeared with a vengeance. Mankind had mastered interstellar travel. Yet though the speeds of iron rockets was eventually stepped up to suboptical journeys, to even the nearest stars took up to 20 years. Item 12 was back in the flying certificates. In terms of actual rocket control, crews were occupied no more than 0.01% of flight time. TV faded away a few days after blastoff. Radio lasted another month, and there were still years and years ahead. Rockets were manned by crews of 6 to 8 in those days, no more. Tiny cabins and a 150 long foot greenhouse were all the living space they had. It is difficult for us who fly in interstellar linears to imagine how people in those days did without all these gyms, swimming pools, stereo theaters, and promenade galleries. But I have digressed without beginning my story. I don't know, haven't yet had time to find out who it was that designed the archives building, but he was obviously a highly skilled architect, gifted and daring. The building rise on the shore of a Siberian reservoir sea which was formed 20 years ago when they dammed the Ob. The main building stands on a high shore. I don't know how it was done, but it seems to soar above the water, a white pile looking like a schooner under a full press of sail. Altogether, there are 15 people at the archives. I have already met some of them. Most of them are here for short spells. An Australian writer is collecting material about the first interstellar flight. A scholar from Leningrad is studying the history of Mars. The diffident Indian is a famous sculptor. Two engineers, a tall, strong-faced young man from Saratov and a small, polite Japanese, are working together on some project. What kind? I don't know. The Japanese smiled politely when I asked him about it. Oh, it's an absolute trifle, not at all worthy of your high attention. But I am digressing again when I should really be beginning my story. I came to the Central Astronautics Archives to look into the history of the 12th item which I needed for my research. I spoke to the director the first evening. He's a man still in his prime, who all but lost the sight of both his eyes in a fuel tank explosion aboard a rocket. He wears glasses of some special make, triple lensed and blue tinted. His eyes are not visible, and it seems the man never smiles. Well, he said, having heard me out, I think you should start with Sector O14. Oh, excuse me. That's the system we use here. It doesn't mean anything to you, of course. I meant the first expedition to Bernard's star. To my shame, I knew next to nothing about that expedition. Your flights were in different directions, he said with a shrug. Sirius, Procyon, and 61 Cygni. And all your research so far has been on flights to those stars, hasn't it? I was surprised that he should know my record so well. The story of Alexei Sarubin, commander of the expedition, he went on, will provide the answers to some of your questions. You will have your material in half an hour. Good luck. The eyes were invisible behind the blue tinted lenses. His voice sounded sad. The materials are on my desk. The paper is yellow with time. The ink on some of the documents they wrote with ink in those days has faded. But their meaning is not lost. There are infrared copies of all the documents. The paper has been laminated and the sheets feel hard and smooth. Through the window I can see the sea. Its breakers roll in ponderously. The water rustles up the shore like pages being turned. An expedition to Bernard's star in those days was a hazardous adventure. The star is 6 light years away from the Earth. The rocket was to fly half that distance under acceleration and half under deceleration. The journey there and back was expected to take just under 14 years. For those abroad, the time would be slowed down to only 40 months. Not too long ago, it seemed. But the danger was that for 38 out of those 40 months, the rocket engine was required to work at full blast. The rocket had no fuel reserve, an unwarranted risk. One would think nowadays, but there was no alternative then. The ship could take no more than what the tightly calculated fuel tanks carried. Therefore, any delay en route would be fatal. I read the minutes of the selection committee. One after another, the candidates for captains were turned down, and no wonder. The flight was to be exceptionally hard. The captain had to be an excellent engineer and combine a level head with reckless courage. Then suddenly everybody was unanimous. I turned a page. The service record of Captain Alexei Sarubin. A few minutes and 3 pages later, I realized why Alexei Sarubin was selected captain of the Polis. In a truly amazing way, the man combined ice and fire, the calm sagacity of a scholar and the fiery temperament of a fighter. That was probably why he had been entrusted with the most daring ventures. He seemed to have the knack of overcoming insurmountable obstacles. The committee selected the captain. As tradition decreed, the captain picked his own crew, but what Sarubin did could hardly be called picking. He just contacted 5 astronauts who had crewed with him before and asked whether they were prepared to undertake a risky journey. With him, yes, they said. There are photographs of the crew and the materials, black and white, two-dimensional. Captain Sarubin was 26 then, but he looks older in the photo. A rather full face with high cheekbones, tightly pressed lips, a prominent aquiline nose, wavy, soft-looking hair, and unusual eyes, calm, seemingly lazy, but with the daredevil flicker lurking in the corners. The others were even younger. 2 engineers, a married couple, photographed together because they always flew together. The navigator, with the meditative look of a musician, a stern-faced girl doctor, and an astrophysicist. His eyes stubborn in a face patchy with deep burns, the results of a crash landing he had made with the captain on Dione, a satellite of Saturn. Now for item 12. I thumb the pages and see the pictures have told the truth. The navigator is a musician and composer. The stern-faced girl is keen on microbiology, a serious subject. The astrophysicist is learning languages. He had already mastered 5 and now thinks of tackling Latin and ancient Greek. The engineers are fond of chess, the new kind, with 2 white and 2 black queens and an 81 square board. The captain's hobby strikes an odd note. It's unusual, unique. I have never heard of anything like it. He's been keen on oil painting since he was a boy. That is understandable, for his mother was a professional painter. But the captain seldom takes up his brush. He's interested in something else. He yearns to rediscover the lost secrets of the medieval masters, the composition of their oils, the way they mixed and used them. He carried out chemical research as he does everything he undertakes, with the devotion of a scholar and the ardor of an artist. 6 different people, 6 different personalities and backgrounds. It's the captain who wields them together. They love him. They trust him. They even imitate him. So all of them know how to be freezingly calm and recklessly risky. The blast off a Barnard star. The atom reactor works without a hitch, letting out an even, invisible stream of ions. The ship flies under acceleration. It is hard at first to work, even to move about. The girl doctor makes everybody stick to a fixed regimen. Gradually, the astronauts settle down to the flight conditions. The greenhouse is assembled, then the radio telescope. Normal life begins. Control of the reactor and other mechanisms take up very little time. Everyone has to devote 4 hours a day to studies in his own field. The rest they spend as they think fit. The serious minded girl is devouring monographs on microbiology. The navigator has composed a song which is quite a hit. The engineer Kumpel sits for hours over the chessboard. The astrophysicist wades through Plutarch in the original. There are brief entries in the ship's log. The flight is proceeding normally. The reactor and mechanisms operate faultlessly. Spirits are high. Then suddenly, an anguished entry. Telecommunication has gone dead. The rocket is beyond reach now. Yesterday we watched the last telecast from the Earth. How hard it is to see one more link severed. Days later, 2 more lines. Have perfected the reception antenna of the radio. Hope to be able to carry on reception for another 7 or 8 days. And they were happy as could be when the radio actually worked for another 12 days. Building up speed, the ship swept towards Barnard's star. Months went by. The atom reactor worked with utmost precision. The fuel was consumed strictly as pre-computed, not an iota above. The catastrophe came unannounced. One day, when they were over 7 months out, the reactor's operating condition changed. A side reaction had sharply stepped up fuel consumption. There was a brief entry in the log that day. Have no idea what had caused the side reaction. They did not know in those distant days that infinitesimal admixtures in the atomic fuel could sometimes make all the difference between a controlled and uncontrolled reaction. The sea grumbles outside the window. The wind has picked up and the breakers no longer rustle but hiss angrily as they pound the shore. A woman's laughter wafts into me, but I mustn't let myself be distracted. I can almost see those 6 in the rocket. I know them. I can imagine what they were going through. I may be wrong in some details. What does it matter? But no, I am even right in those. I feel certain everything happened as I see it. A brownish liquid boiled frothily in the retort. The brownish steam passed through a coil pipe into the condenser. The captain was peering at the dark red powder in the test tube. The door opened. The flame wavered and danced. The captain turned his head. Framed in the doorway was the engineer. He kept control of himself, but his voice betrayed him. It was loud, unnaturally firm, and altogether not as usual. Take the load off your feet, Nikolai, the captain said and pushed a chair forward. I did those calculations yesterday with the same results. Come on, sit down. What shall we do? Do? The captain glanced at the wall clock. 55 minutes to supper, enough time to discuss it. Please let everyone know we'll be having a conference, will you? Very well, the engineer replied absently. I'll let them know. Yes, of course. He couldn't understand why the captain dawdled. The ship's speed was increasing with every passing second. Some kind of decision was imperative and urgent. Look at this, the captain said. passing him the test tube. You might be interested. It's cinnabar. Makes a devilishly attractive oil, but tends to darken when exposed to light. He explained to the captain at some length how he managed to produce a light-resistant cinnabar. The engine shook the test tube impatiently. There was a clock empaneled above the desk which the engine couldn't help glancing at. Half a minute the speed was a mile and a quarter per second greater. Another minute, another 2.5 miles per second. I'll be going, he said finally. I must tell the others. Going down the steps, he realized he was no longer counting the seconds or at all hurrying. The captain shut the door tightly and put the test tube casually back into the rack. He allowed himself a faint smile. Panic is after all a chain reaction, which all things extraneous tends to slow down. He thought as he went back to his chair. The humming of the reactor cooling system filled his ears. The engines were busy accelerating the Polar's flight. 10 minutes later, the captain went down to the mess room. The 5 astronauts rose in greeting. All of them were in astronauts' uniform, worn only on special occasions. And the captain realized there was no need for him to explain the situation. Well, he said, it seems only I forgot to don the uniform. Nobody smiled. Please be seated, the captain said. A council of war. Well now, let the youngest begin, as is the custom. You, Lena. What do you think we should do? He turned to the girl. She solemnly said, I'm a girl, Alexei Pavlovich, and the problem under discussion is strictly technological. I will give my opinion later if I may. The captain nodded. As you like. You're the cleverest amongst us, Lena, and as a woman the shrewdest too. I'll bet anything you like you've got an opinion ready. The girl said nothing. Well, the captain went on, Lena will speak later. Your turn, Sergei. The astrophysicist spread his arms in a gesture of indecision. This isn't up my alley either. I've got nothing packed. But I do know there's enough fuel to last us all the way to Bernard's star. So why should we turn back when we're only halfway out? Why? The captain repeated. Just because once we're there we won't be able to come back at all. But we can now, when we're only halfway out, as you say. I see your point, the astrophysicist said thoughtfully, but you know, we might be able to return after all. Not by ourselves, of course. By a relief rocket. They'll see we're not coming and they'll send one. Surely astronautics is developing. So it is, the captain smiled dryly. With the passage of time. So fly on, is that it? Good. Now you, Georgie. If it's up your alley, of course. The navigator sprang up, pushing his chair aside. Sit down, the captain said. Sit down and speak calmly. Don't jump. There can be no question of returning, the navigator almost shouted. We can only go forward. Forward in face of the impossible. Why? How can we even speak of returning? Didn't we know from the outset the expedition was hazardous? And here we are ready to turn tail at the first difficulty. I say forward, and only forward. Well, the captain drawled. Forward in face of the impossible. Beautifully said. Well, what do the engineers think? You, Nina? And you, Nikolai? Nikolai glanced at his wife. She nodded, and he began. He spoke calmly, as if thinking aloud. The purpose of our flight to Bernard's star is exploration. But if we six make some discovery, it won't in itself have any value. It will have that only if and when mankind learns about it. If we reach Bernard's star and have no means of coming back, what earthly use will there be in our findings? Sergei says a relief rocket will come eventually. I too think that is feasible, but those who come will themselves have made all the discoveries. What shall we have accomplished? What shall we have contributed to man's knowledge? Actually, we shall only have brought harm. Yes, I mean it. Back on the earth, they will be waiting for our return, and in vain. If we turn back now, only a minimum of time will be wasted. A new expedition will immediately set out. In fact, we ourselves will. A few years may be lost, but then the data we've so far gathered will have been safely brought to the earth. As things stand now, there's no chance of that. So why go on? We too are against it. We must turn back. And now. A long silence descended. Then the girl asked, "What do you think, Captain?" The captain smiled wistfully. "I think the engineers are right. Beautiful words are still words, but the engineers appeal to common sense and calculations we set out to discover. If we do not pass on our discoveries, they might as well not have been made. Nikolai is absolutely right." Nikolai got up and ponderously paced the mess room. Walking was difficult. The 3G loaded the 3G load brought about by the rocket's acceleration impeded movement. The Leaf rocket variant is out, he went on, but there are still two possibilities. The Leaf rocket variant is out, he went on, but there are still two possibilities. The first is to turn back to the Earth. The second, to fly on to Bernard's star and still return to the Earth, return in spite of fuel shortage. How? Asked Nikolai. Sarabin went back to his chair, sat down and said, "That I don't know, not yet anyway, but there are another 11 months of flight ahead. If you decide we should turn back now, we will. But if you will trust me to think up something in those 11 months that would pull us through, well then, forward in face of the impossible. That is the way I see it, friends. What do you say? You, Lena." The girl screwed her eyes at him. "Like any man, you're very cunning. I bet you've already thought up something." The captain laughed. "You'd lose. I haven't thought up anything, but I will. I certainly will." "We believe in you," Nikolai said. "We do believe in you." Then, after a pause, he said, "Though frankly, I don't quite see how anything could pull us through. There will be 18 per second of propellant on the Polus, 18 instead of 50. But you said you'd think up something, so let's fly on. As Georgie says, forward in face of the impossible." The window shutters creak softly. The wind leaves through the pages, scars above the room, filling it with damp smell of the sea. Smell is a wonderful thing. You don't have it on board ship. The conditioners purify the air and keep up the required humidity and temperature. But conditioned air is as vapid as distilled water. All sorts of artificial smell devices have been tried, but no success. The aroma of ordinary earthly air is much too complex to imitate. Even now I smell the sea and the damp autumn leaves and vaguely some perfume and something on a gust of wind, the earth, and wet paint too. The wind is leafing through the pages. What could it be the captain counted on? When the Polus had reached Bernard's star, her fuel reserve would be down to only 18 per second, 18 instead of 50. In the morning, I asked the director whether I may see Zarubin's pictures. "We'll have to go upstairs," he says. "But tell me, have you read it all?" He listened to my answer, nodding. "I see. I thought so too. Yes, the captain took upon himself a great responsibility. Would you have believed him? Would you have believed in him? Yes, so would I. He is silent for quite a while, his lips quivering slightly. Then he gets up and goes through the motions of adjusting his spectacles. Well, let's go. He limps. We walk slowly through the long corridors. You will read about it yet. The director starts. Volume 2, starting from page 100, if I remember rightly. Sarabin wanted to unravel the secrets of the Italian Renaissance masters. You see, all pointing deteriorated starting with the 18th century. I mean its technique. A lot was thought to have been lost beyond hope of recovery. The painters could no longer mix oils that were at once bright and stable. The brighter the oil, the quicker it darkened, especially the blues. Well, Sarabin, but you will see for yourself. The pictures hang in a narrow sunlit gallery, and the first thing that strikes me is that each is executed in one primary color. These are studies, says the director, to try out the technique, nothing more. This is a study in blue. Flying side by side in the blue sky are two frail human figures with strapped on wings, a man and a woman. All is done in blue, and never have I seen such an infinity of shades. It is a night sky, raven black on the left horizon, and a melting midday blue in the opposite corner. The winged humans shimmer from the lightest blue to the deepest violet. The colors are brilliant, almost vibrant in some places, and subdued, transparent in others. We will continue with our feature presentation of the story The Astronaut in the next installment. Thank you for joining us, and we thank the Collectors Admiralty again for allowing us to read their books and to make audiobooks of them to preserve them for future generations. Thank you.